Back to the daily grind. The channel's getting false flagged by triggered trolls, so make sure you subscribe to the new channel. Let's get to the MMA news. Kevin Lee, the Motown Phenom versus the world has arrived. Let's fucking get to it. If you don't know how these go, we go into the fighters' history first, and then how I believe they would do versus the 1 through 15th ranked fighters currently in the UFC. So, Kevin Lee, the Motown Phenom, he was just now recently scheduled to replace Khabib Nurmagomedov in the interim title fight versus Tony Ferguson. The fight has yet to happen, and that's just because, I might come back to this after the fight, so that's just a disclaimer. The fight has not happened yet. It was just scheduled. So Kevin Lee, the Motown Phenom, he's 16-2, fucking young. He's the new breed of MMA, should I say. He's only 24 years old, and he's got the potential to be one of the youngest champions, definitely in the lightweight division. John Jones currently holds the record for the youngest champion ever to win the UFC title. Kevin Lee is very close to that. So he's 24 years old, already at the top of the division, already making he calls people out in the top 5 that turn him down repeatedly. So that's one of the differences. I'll say, like, when I get into some of these top lightweights like Khabib Nurmagomedov, why I actually believe Kevin Lee would beat Khabib, and I'll get into that. Even though Khabib's undefeated, it's about activity. It's about willingness to fight. Kevin Lee, he'll fight 3 to 4 times a year on top of fight any all-out people anytime, anywhere. Khabib Nurmagomedov, he's not very active. He fights 2 times a year when on a good year, 1 times a year on a bad year. So, I don't think he has fought 3 times in like the last 5 years. So, I don't even know if he's ever done it. So, Khabib in the very beginning of his career, maybe. So, Khabib Nurmagomedov is less active. Now, Kevin Lee, when you look at his strength of schedule, you don't see all the names that you see on somebody like a Tony Ferguson's, but that's because Kevin Lee's young in the game. So there's a very low reward and a high risk fight in Kevin Lee, because he's a guy that came up through collegiate wrestling, which is the best base in MMA, like wrestling. Like most wrestlers people who come from wrestling translate to MMA the best as far as becoming overall MMA fighters. If you're a boxer and you come over, you usually don't have as much success as a wrestler who comes over. Same with someone who's straight jiu-jitsu. You usually don't have as much success as the wrestlers that come over. That's why a lot of the champions, in the Cain Velasquez's, the people that were dominant champions. Daniel Cormier, somewhat, he's undefeated except for John Jones. Who else? There's a lot of wrestlers. You get the point. So Kevin Lee, but he wasn't a wrestler that switched to MMA. He got into wrestling he knew he was going to MMA. So he only wanted to learn the shit he could take to MMA. He wasn't trying to learn the technical falls and all that stuff. He got into wrestling knowing, I'm going to be going to MMA. That's my goals. So as a youngster, he started training all of the fucking, even in college he had jiu-jitsu and boxing classes. So growing up, even though he has a strong wrestling base, he's a well overall fighter, and it's been since one of the guys who it's the new breed. You see what I'm saying? I'm not going to repeat that. So Kevin Lee, 16-2. His only 2 losses have came in the UFC. One of them was his very first fight in the UFC to Ally at Quinta. And after that, he went on a 4-5 fight winning streak. And he was calling out Ally Quinta like, man, I want that fight back. I want that fight back. I'll beat his ass. He knows he got away with one, but he's never been able to get that fight back. A lot of guys, don't like the idea of fighting Kevin Lee. They see his potential. Now, Ally Quinta has a win over him, but Ally Quinta, he's into a beef with the UFC, and he's not being very active, like as far as he's doing real estate because he's mad that the UFC, I don't even know why he's mad, man. He just be coming out pissed off. Something about a surgery and something about being pissed off and more money and all type of shit. So Ally Quinta's not fighting much. He fought once in the last 2 years, and it was against Diego Sanchez, and since then he's not fighting again. So Ally Quinta, even though Kevin Lee has a loss over him, it was Kevin Lee's very first fight in the UFC, and he wants it back. It's not like, and in that fight, it was a really close fight. Kevin Lee actually had a 10-8 in the second round. I went back and watched a lot of Kevin Lee's fights before I did this. In the second round, you could have easily had a 10-8 for Kevin Lee. Completely controlled Al Iaquinta in the second round. The first round, Al Iaquinta dropped Kevin Lee once, but it was a close round, so it was definitely a 10-9. The third round could have went either fighter's way. Probably Al Iaquinta's, but if you give Kevin Lee a 10-8 in the second round, then you could have had that a draw. But Al Iaquinta got out with the win. It was Kevin Lee's first fight in the UFC, so sometimes, they don't. People who are more experienced get the nod a little bit sometimes. I mean, I know that's not always the case, but Kevin Lee, that was his very first fight in the UFC, and he didn't get the nod. Went on to win 4 fights versus Jesse Ronson. Then he finished James Moontasri by submission. Then he took his second and only loss in his UFC career to Leonardo Santos. This fight, Kevin Lee was the aggressor. He was coming forward in the first round. He was starting to find his range and get comfortable. When he was coming forward, though, Leonardo landed one shot that dropped Kevin Lee, and before he was able to recover, Leonardo swarmed him, so John McCarthy had to stop the fight. But Kevin Lee was looking good before he got clipped. That's one of Kevin Lee's only weaknesses to me is, but just like everybody, you have the once you get hit, it kind of falters you. You drop a little bit. I've noticed that in a few of Kevin Lee's fights, whether it be a hard kick or just a straight shot, a straight punch. Kevin Lee looked like he got dropped, even though it wasn't square on his ass like in the Leonardo Santos fight. He did in the Al Iaquinta fight. But usually once he gets dropped, he's able to recover very well with a takedown attempt, a well-timed takedown attempt, and he's able to recover on the ground. So even though I've seen him get dropped, he usually recovers very well. After he lost to Leonardo Santos, he went on to fight Efrain Escudero, Jake Matthews, Magomed Mustafaev, who's another like Khabib Nurmagomedov. He's from Dagestan, and actually before the Magomed fight, Kevin Lee and him got into a little beef, and Magomed was talking about how he's going to show Kevin Lee who the elite wrestler is, and he was talking about how he's the better wrestler. So Kevin Lee said, I didn't even want to finish this fight. I wanted to pick him down and take him down. I wanted to pick him up and take him down as many times as I could. Kevin Lee took him down multiple times and ended up winning by rear naked choke in the second round, and that started Kevin Lee's rear naked choke spree that he's on currently. After he rear naked choked Magomed Mustafaev after repeated takedowns, and this is how he's finished all 3 of his last fights as well. He locks in the body triangle. It usually ends up on top of you with the body triangle and sinks in the rear naked choke. Sometimes he even does it from just from the back, but still, all 3 of his last fights, he's locked in the body triangle and got the rear naked choke off of his wrestling, which he sets up with his striking. Very good overall. It's crazy. He uses his striking to set up his wrestling, and then he finishes you with his jiu-jitsu. That's literally overall. That's beautiful. If you're an MMA fan, uses the striking to set up the wrestling, finishes you with the jiu-jitsu. Every fucking step. Boom, boom, boom. That's perfect. I mean, I just thought about that now. That's perfect. Use the striking to set up the wrestling, and when you got him down, use your jiu-jitsu. That's every fucking aspect. Striking, wrestling, jiu-jitsu. He does that and finishes his fights. That's how he's won his last 3 fights. That's the new breed right there now that I think. That's crazy. I'm thinking he uses his striking to go into his wrestling, to go into his jiu-jitsu. Overall fighter. Overall. That's literally low-key perfect. Like, all 3 of them. He does very well. It's not one dominates the other. So, Kevin Lee, that's why he's one of my favorite fighters. He's one of the best overall fighters in the division, even though he's only 24 years old. A lot of people know this. A lot of people turn down the fight with him, whether it be an injury, whether it be, oh, yeah, I want to fight him, and it's like the Jorge Masvidal syndrome. Yeah, I'll fight him, but something's coming up. No, yeah, I'll fight that guy. No, I'm not ducking him, but something's coming up. Oh, no, he needs to get a few more wins under his belt. You need to beat some more people. But the people don't want to give him the opportunity because he's high risk, low reward. Not many people are, know Kevin Lee. Unless you're a hardcore fan, you don't know much about Kevin Lee. And he's one of the best fighters, so that's why people turn him down a lot. So, since his loss to Leonardo Santos, he's on a 5-fight winning streak, 4-fight finishing spree. Jake Matthews was TKO punches, Magomed rear naked choke, Francisco Trinaldo rear naked choke as well. and then Michael Chiesa. Some people say that was controversial, but to me it wasn't too controversial. I've watched the stoppage in slow motion repeatedly. I've watched it in fast motion. I've watched it in normal motion. I watched it when it was going on live, and I was fine with the stoppage every single time versus Michael Chiesa. The only thing people are saying is, well, he should have moved Michael, he should have did the limp test. He should have fucking moved Michael Chiesa's hand and made sure he was actually asleep. Like, even though he saw his hands stop fighting and he saw his hands go limp, should have shook his hand. Like, he wasn't going to tap because he was going out. Like, if you watch it in slow motion, normal motion, or fast motion, you'll see Michael Chiesa's hands were going limp. He's saying he was about to tuck his chin into and get out of the submission. No, it was the choke was under the chin. His hands, he was fighting the hands, and then his hands looked like they went limp as he stopped fighting the hands. So, I mean, it's controversial literally only because you didn't see tap. And Michael Chiesa had a lot of fucking momentum going into that fight. If you remember, Michael Chiesa charged Kevin Lee at the press conference, "You're not gonna talk about my mother," even though he wasn't talking about his mother. He just said the word mom, and Michael Chiesa was so hot-headed, he was like, "You said the word mom! Don't talk about my mom! I'm coming for you!" And it was like, what? And then he still got popped on the way over. And then going into the fight, Michael Chiesa was talking about, "I'm going to take him down and I'm going to submit him and it's going to be easy." And, Kevin Lee went in there and took Michael Chiesa down and submitted him. And it looked kind of somewhat easy. This is the thing, because in the fight, Michael Chiesa even had a good position. He got Kevin Lee down and got on top of him. Kevin Lee was able to use his defensive jiu-jitsu and defensive wrestling to not only get out of Michael Chiesa's submission attempt, but to stand back up to his feet. But when it was vice versa and Kevin Lee got on top of Michael Chiesa, he finished the job. It wasn't Michael Chiesa getting back to his feet. None of that. No, it was controversial stoppage, but it was stoppage. So, I mean, Kevin Lee was the better fighter. Kevin Lee would beat him in the rematch. And then if they wanted a trilogy, I think Kevin Lee would beat Michael Chiesa again. I like Michael Chiesa a lot, but I just feel like Kevin Lee's the new breed here. Michael Chiesa's more of a one-dimensional fighter, as far as his jiu-jitsu is his strategy. And Kevin Lee, he's got the jiu-jitsu, the wrestling, and the striking. The striking to set up the wrestling, to set up the jiu-jitsu. That's like a fucking MMA orgasmic chain of fucking... That just makes me like Kevin Lee even more now that I think about that while I'm doing this. Use the striking to set up the wrestling, to set up the jiu-jitsu. That's the perfect fucking chain. I need to start hearing that talked about on these MMA. This is how MMA should go. MMA for dummies. You want to use your striking to set up your wrestling, to set up your jiu-jitsu. If you're missing the wrestling, you can't get jiu-jitsu. That could literally be the MMA for dummies class. Well-rounded MMA for dummies. You want to use your striking to set up your wrestling, which sets up your jiu-jitsu. If you don't have the striking, you can't get your takedown attempt, and you can't get to your jiu-jitsu. If you don't have the wrestling, you can strike, but you'll never be able to get to your jiu-jitsu. The boxer jiu-jitsu fighters like Nate Diaz. They're not able to submit as many people as they would like because they don't have the wrestling, the middle part. I'm using that from now on, you guys. I'm about to get into the top 15, but I'm using that from now on. Overall MMA for dummies. Well-rounded MMA for dummies. Use your striking to set up your wrestling, to set up your jiu-jitsu. The guys that can do that are the best pound for pound, well-rounded fighters to me, because that is beautiful. To me, that's what MMA should be about. You literally in that order. You're striking because you start off on your feet, to set up your wrestling, which gets it the mat, and then you got to be able to finish from the mat. And if you can't do it with your ground and pound, the jiu-jitsu is fucking perfect. If you're a fighter that's been coming up training MMA as a kid like Kevin Lee, that's how you should be doing shit. So that's fucking awesome to see. Fucking MMA for dummies. So that was his last fight versus Michael Chiesa. His fourth finish in a row, third submission in a row, fifth win in a row, and now he's going versus versus Tony Ferguson for the interim title. The only problem with this is I think Tony Ferguson's one of the only two people in this division that can beat Kevin Lee today. And we'll get into that. Time to go to the top 15. So, Conor McGregor, I think, would beat Kevin Lee because, as I've said, I've seen Kevin Lee get dropped, and Conor McGregor, if he drops you, you're probably not getting back up. On top of Conor's got good defensive jiu-jitsu, good defensive wrestling, and exceptional striking. So I believe his striking would be able to, to take Kevin Lee out. But the one thing is, I think he could clip Kevin Lee and win the fight at the same time, though. Kevin Lee's wrestling is, if he had a full camp, it would be something Conor McGregor's probably never seen before. As far as if Kevin Lee was able to get on Conor McGregor's back with that body triangle, Conor McGregor wouldn't survive it, I don't believe. Just like Michael Chiesa, just like Mustafa, and just like Trinaldo, I don't think he would be able to survive that if he got that body triangle locked in. But I don't know if Kevin Lee would be able to get it there, because we've seen in the Chad Mendes fight, Conor McGregor, defend takedown attempts. We've seen him get back up. We've seen him, you not even just be defensive on the ground where you lock your legs and hold him down. No, he put his feet on Chad Mendez's hips to kick out and stand back up to win the fight. So he was able to stand back up. So he might be able to do better than some of these other guys to stand back up versus Kevin Lee. Although Magomed Mustafa, or whatever his name is, he was a really good wrestler and he wasn't able to get back up. He was getting taken down repeatedly. So Kevin Lee, although I have Conor McGregor winning the fight, definitely has a chance. Now versus Khabib Nurmagomedov, this is a close fight. I was leaning toward Khabib before he had to pull out, but now I just got to go with Kevin Lee because of the activity, the willingness to fight anybody. Kevin Lee's called out Khabib, he's called out Eddie Alvarez, he's called out Edson Barboza, he's called out Justin Gaethje, he's called out Nate Diaz, he's literally called out Ali Quinta, Michael Chiesa, everybody. Kevin Lee said, I'll fight any of them. No, nobody wants to fight. Khabib's like, I'll only fight 2 people, and it's got to be on my terms. So I got to pick Kevin Lee, because on top of that, Khabib Nurmagomedov has health issues now. He's having surgeries and missing weight, and I got to go with Kevin Lee. Khabib hasn't shown me any reason to think he can beat Kevin Lee, except for he's undefeated. But even they have a similarity in their records, because if you look at it, they've got a lot of wins and a little losses, but you don't know many of the names on their resume. Actually, if you look at the resume, there's 2 names that stake out on each of their resumes. Khabib Nurmagomedov has RDA and his most recent fight, Michael Johnson. Kevin Lee has Francisco Trinaldo and Michael Chiesa. So they're both in the same position, but the difference here is Kevin Lee's way more active, way more willing to fight anytime, anywhere, any place. So I would pick him to beat Khabib for that fact alone. Now let's move down to Tony Ferguson. I would pick Tony Ferguson to beat Kevin Lee, even though I like both of these fighters, and Kevin Lee's also one of my favorite fighters, and he, I believe he deserves this title shot. I just believe it's Tony Ferguson's era for like this year or maybe the next year. Because Tony Ferguson's 33 years old. Kevin Lee's 24. Kevin Lee is the future of the lightweight division. If anything, Conor McGregor goes anywhere or something like that, if anyone ever beats Conor McGregor, Kevin Lee's in 2 years, 3 years, this will be Kevin Lee's division. He'll go on a run. If he's able to beat Tony Ferguson, then able to beat Conor McGregor, it'll start sooner than later, like Max Holloway's. But Kevin Lee is, to me, like Max Holloway. He's a young guy that has the potential. He's the future of the division. Now, Tony Ferguson reminds me of like the Frankie Edgar in featherweight. Like, yes, you are the future of the division, but this might be my time for the next couple years. Like, you're the future of the division, but this is my division now. And Frankie Edgar less so than Tony Ferguson, because he's had his opportunities. But it's like, if anyone in featherweight's going to beat Max Holloway, it's going to be Frankie Edgar. If anybody in lightweight's going to beat Kevin Lee, it's going to be Tony Ferguson or Conor McGregor. And that's how it is. Other than that, they're the future of the division. So, I got Tony Ferguson being able to be in the favorite. And like I said, Kevin Lee's got a chance. The only 2 people I have beaten Kevin Lee are Conor and Tony, and he still has a chance versus both of them. I just have them beating him. So Eddie Alvarez, I've got this one was tough. This one was really tough. Eddie Alvarez also has the experience, but I just believe Kevin Lee would be able to get the job done. This one was like a 50-50 really with Eddie Alvarez. Really. I mean, just from Eddie Alvarez's last couple showings makes me lean more toward Kevin Lee. We've seen him fucking just look out of his element versus Conor McGregor. Then he came back versus Dustin Poirier, and he was losing the first round, actually getting clipped up, and came back and, got those knees off, and he was in a good position and stuff. But I mean, he was actually doing good in the second round. He was looking fine in the second round. He was winning the second round. But the fight ended off, no contest and stuff. Now he's going to be fighting Justin Gaethje after the Ultimate Fighter finale. So Eddie Alvarez is tied up, and he's got that check, a little more comfortable, little out of his prime instead of going into his prime like Kevin Lee. So I would just, even though I think the fight would be close to a toss-up, I would give the slight edge to Kevin Lee. So I would pick Kevin Lee, even though that would be closer than a lot of the other matchups. Same with Edson Barboza, though. Edson Barboza, I almost gave the W over Kevin Lee, but it's just he's coming off of an injury. Kevin Lee's more in his prime. Edson Barboza's last 3 wins weren't over young Thundercats like Kevin Lee. I mean, he fought Beneil Dariush, a jiu-jitsu guy, and he was getting outstruck by Beneil Dariush until he won by flying knee KO, which Kevin Lee shoots for a lot of takedowns. So Edson Barboza could win the fight for sure by another flying knee, but I just have, without the flying knee landing, I think Kevin Lee would win the fight, whether it be using the fucking MMA for dummies. I'm not saying him a dumb. I'm just saying he's some of the best overall MMA in the game. He uses striking to set up his wrestling, to set up his jiu-jitsu. Edson Barboza is more going to be using his striking to set up his striking, to, you know what I'm saying? So I have Kevin Lee as a little bit of a better overall fighter than Edson Barboza. He's more healthy than Edson Barboza currently, as well as he's been a little more active than Edson Barboza recently. So I got Kevin Lee with a slight edge. Like Eddie Alvarez, he's not going to dominate him, but it's just a slight edge. Justin Gaethje, same thing, man. I almost gave Justin Gaethje the W over Kevin Lee. It's just hard. We've only seen him once in the UFC versus Michael Johnson, and he's here to take damage. I mean, he's got really good defensive wrestling, though. That's why I almost gave it to him. But with just his willingness to take damage, and he doesn't care about winning or losing, he just wants to entertain. With that mindset, I can't just pick you to win just because you're not going in there to win. You're going in there to entertain. So even though I think you're really good, win is the last shot you're gonna take. Kevin Lee said, Justin Gaethje versus Eddie Alvarez, they're both going to punch each other into retirement. They're both already punch drunk. And I mean, I'm not going to be the one to say they're punch drunk or anything like disrespectful. I'm just saying, with that game plan of going in there for a war and taking damage, you are going to have a lower shelf life than smarter fighters. So, Justin Gaethje, I think Kevin Lee would be able to put together a game plan, although he could get caught, man. Michael Johnson almost took Justin Gaethje out. We probably wouldn't even really be concerned about Justin Gaethje if he didn't come back. It was such a great fight versus Michael Johnson, probably fight of the year. But if Michael Johnson was able to seal the deal when he dropped Justin Gaethje, we wouldn't even be talking about this. And that's just because Justin Gaethje's style. I'm either getting knocked out or I'm knocking you out. Kevin Lee, man, I think he'd have just a slight edge. I could see Justin Gaethje winning, just like I could see Edson Barboza beating Kevin Lee. Just like I could see Eddie Alvarez beating Kevin Lee. I just have Kevin Lee as the slight favorite. Same with Nate Diaz. I like this lightweight. It's killers, man. But Kevin Lee, I just think he's the future of the division. Nate Diaz, he's been inactive. He hasn't been wanting to fight anybody except Conor. He's waiting on the Conor fight, and you can't be mad at that. But with this interim title fight scheduled, you have to wonder if he's even going to be able to get the Conor fight. Unless Kevin Lee or Tony Ferguson get injured, you like Robert Whittaker, then we're not going to get to see the Nate Diaz fight, because that's the only way an interim champion can really get skipped over. So it would be a good fight, fun fight, but I just think Kevin Lee has a little better wrestling than Nate Diaz. I mean, Kevin Lee's got elite striking, jiu-jitsu, and wrestling. Nate Diaz has elite striking and jiu-jitsu. So I just got Kevin Lee, even though Nate Diaz has the potential to box him up. He's got the potential to box his ass up. And Nate Diaz doesn't get finished. He's only lost 3 times, and that was to submission. But Kevin Lee's got the potential. Kevin Lee's also got that wrestling, man. We've seen Nate Diaz look bad against wrestlers, but they were the bigger wrestlers like Rory McDonald and such. But boy, was that Suplex City, Nate Diaz versus Rory McDonald round 3. I always refer to that because it was fucking Suplex City in the UFC. I felt bad seeing my man Nate Diaz get slammed around like that. And so Kevin Lee, he's got potential. He's got that. He slams people. He's a lightweight that slams people. So Kevin Lee might slam Nate Diaz a couple times, might be able to get that body lock in. I mean, who knows, man? Nate Diaz is definitely a formidable opponent, but I would have Kevin Lee edging it out. Now, with the rest of these guys, it's a little more favorable, toward Kevin Lee. Dustin Poirier, Michael Johnson, they've got potential. They've got the puncher's chance, in my opinion, but I think Kevin Lee's the better fighter. Michael Chiesa, Ali Aquinta, Beneil Dariush, Anthony Pettis, all of these guys have also a little bit of puncher's chance, but Kevin Lee's a heavier favorite. And then Evan Dunham, Gilbert Melendez, I got Kevin Lee over all of them as well. So Kevin Lee versus anybody else, Nate Diaz, Justin Gaethje, Edson Barboza, Eddie Alvarez, Tony Ferguson, Khabib, it's anybody's fight. Kevin Lee, I've got him losing to Tony Ferguson and Conor McGregor. Other than that, I think he's the slight favorite versus the other top 5 guys. And then the guys from 5 to 10, pretty much, I think Kevin Lee's just better than them at this point, and he's going to grow to be even better. I think Kevin Lee's the future of the division. Like I said, he's the one that's, not even just the future of the division, one of the new breeds of MMA. Somebody that uses their striking to set up their wrestling, to set up their jiu-jitsu. That's Kevin Lee. He's got it all. The only thing, he's even got style. Shit, I don't got style. I was about to say his style is kind of cringy to me, but that's just my personal preference. Because when you show up with a fucking bandana and some shades, some Beatles shades, dog. I mean, I've just never been a fashion guy. I'm sure that some people probably thought that shit was super fly. I don't really give a fuck. But still, some people don't like his trash talk. They say it's just trash talk. But regardless of if you don't like his style or his trash talk, you have to like the fighting. You have to like the fighting. And that's really what we're watching this for. So if you're a Kevin Lee hater and you say, it's because his trash talk's cringy, that's not good enough for me. If you say, it's because I don't like what he dresses, that's not good enough for me. You're going to have to give me a fighting reason why you don't Kevin Lee. Kevin Lee probably, you can say, he hasn't fought no one in the top 5 yet. And it's like, well, these guys aren't fighting anybody. You know what I'm saying? Khabib's not fighting anybody. Eddie Alvarez is on tough. Justin Gaethje's on tough. Edson Barboza is injured. Nate Diaz isn't fighting anybody. There's no one for him in the top 5 for him to fight. No one wants it. No one wants to fight anybody. So that's not Kevin Lee's fault. So it is what it is, man. I'm happy I did this because I'm going to start using that, not even just on Kevin Lee, just talking about the new breed of fighters. The striking sets up the wrestling, which sets up the jiu-jitsu. And that's the difference between MMA and every other sport. So fucking that was awesome to get out of that. And next, Tony Ferguson versus the world, man, and you can probably see, just looking at this, tell how it goes. Tony Ferguson's going to beat everybody except probably Conor, and he probably got to beat Conor. I think this is El Cucuy season. I think El Cucuy should have probably the belt right now with all the stuff going on. I mean, maybe not. It's definitely Conor McGregor, but I mean, the interim title, I don't see anybody in this division really just fucking with El Cucuy today, including Kevin Lee, my fucking dude. He's definitely got a chance, but Tony Ferguson he's got the juice right now. So I'm getting to Tony Ferguson versus the world next. Thanks for tuning in and listening to Kevin Lee versus the world. If you're still listening, man, much appreciated. Thanks to everybody, the day one hitters, the top shelf hitters, the motherfucking free hitters, the lurker hitters, and the motherfucking, especially the troll hitters. It is what it is. Let the hitters know what the fuck you tell me in the comments, dude.